Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Chunkster-rama, a modest little BookTube event that David Murphy and I have been putting on in quarantine in order to encourage you to pull those great big books off your shelf and read them. The kinds of great big books that we all tell ourselves, if only I had a huge stretch of uninterrupted time, I would pull down that book and reread it, or read it for the first time. And now we have that huge stretch of time, and we're playing Animal Crossing and watching Tiger King. So we're encouraging you to take those big books down, and we thought for our first one, we would read one of the most inviting of all, and one that a lot of people have read, and that is The Lord of the Rings. I've got it in this big box set with the movie artwork, but not intrusive movie artwork. Absolutely new. It has the gilding still on it, gilding still on the books and everything. Just wonderful. I ordered it specifically for this read along, even though I don't need another edition of Lord of the Rings. And what we're doing this week is concluding the Lord of the Rings. Tolkien wrote it as one book. It's traditionally broken up into 3 volumes, and we are reading it. I intentionally got a 3-volume set so that I wouldn't be tempted to think of it as one book, because we're reading one book at a time on Sunday. And we're finishing up with Return of the King, the final volume in this trilogy, if you want to call it that. And this volume takes off from The Two Towers, in that, in The Two Towers, the story is split. Tolkien decides to split his narrative between two very different groups of people. The whole story, as you can tell from the title of the book, revolves around the ring. There's one ring, the one ring of power, forged by the Dark Lord Sauron, the villain of the piece, that is not only rules all the other great rings forged by the Elven Lords, but also can rule everyone. It has the power of dominance, the power of command, and therefore it would be a terrible thing for Sauron to get his hands on again. He had them once upon a time. He wore the ring and was defeated in combat with an army of elves and men millennia ago. And the ring was hacked from his finger by an ancestor of the character Aragorn, who we meet in The Lord of the Rings. But the ring was lost, and had been lost for ages, and was rediscovered. Unbeknownst to anyone, it was rediscovered by Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit, who thought it was just a fun trinket, a ring you put on that makes you invisible, but it turns out to be much, much more than that. It is the ring that Sauron wants, and it has a huge part of his power baked into it. So if it is, for instance, destroyed, he would be destroyed. And there's only one way to destroy it, and that is to throw it into the fires of the mountain where Sauron forged it, Mount Doom, at the heart of Sauron's kingdom in Mordor, guarded by innumerable orcs and trolls and other monsters of all kinds. So a seemingly impossible thing to do, a seemingly impossible quest. And yet in Fellowship of the Ring, the first book that we talked about in Chunksterama, a small group of people, 9 people, sets out specifically to do that, to take the ring to Mordor and destroy it. The Fellowship of the Ring, as they're called, it quickly comes to grief. Their members are sundered left, right, and center, and during a key climactic moment of that first book, Frodo Baggins, the kinsman of Bilbo Baggins and the inheritor of the ring, decides to take it to Mordor himself, alone, without his friends, because he thinks they'll die. This quest really devolves on him. His friend Sam goes with him, and Tolkien splits the narrative between that. So half the book from then on follows the quest of Frodo and Sam as they walk to Mordor, totally defenseless. And the other half describes everybody else. There's Aragorn, who is a descendant of the great kings of the West. There's the wizard Gandalf. There's Legolas representing the elves. There's Gimli representing the dwarfs. There are all sorts of ancient kingdoms. There's the kingdom of Rohan. There's Minas Tirith that stands athwart the border to Mordor and has been fighting it for ages. All sorts of high doings, in other words. You have King Theoden of Rohan, who is a standard Anglo-Saxon warrior king of a horse-loving people who falls in battle against a superior foe, a supernatural foe. You have Denethor, who is the steward of Gondor, and whose mind has been broken. And he's not a king, but he's more arrogant and more deadly, more powerful than a king. And you have the psychological drama there. One son that he loved who died, a member of the Fellowship. One son that he doesn't love who lives and is worthy of his love. And gradually, over the course of The Two Towers, you have these Western powers coalescing. Gradually, they are pulling together into a united front of resistance against Sauron. And even without the ring, even when Sauron doesn't possess it, he still has the advantage. He can swamp these people. He has 10 times their numbers. In terms of his rank and file. So these kings and high powers of the West know they're fighting a losing battle. And in The Return of the King, there's a great expository chapter where they have their final council. And Gandalf, the wizard, who's come through fire and death to lead these people, advises that they march on Mordor, that they march on the black gates of Mordor itself. Hopeless. Every bit as hopeless as Sam and Frodo walking in on their bare feet. And he's brought up on that point. People at that council say, well, that's foolish. We would never win. And Gandalf says, our aim is not to win. Our aim is to draw the attention of Sauron away from his real peril, even if it means we are annihilated. So that even if that quest succeeds somehow, we might not live to see it. And we would die overwhelmed by numbers, by swords and axes, knowing only that although we didn't live to see it, at least there is a chance that the future will happen. Whereas, if the ring returns to the hand of Sauron, no future is possible. None whatsoever. There will be no hope after that. There is at least hope this way, and we can at least die giving that hope its last chance. And that is what the powers of the West decide to do. Which is astonishing. And that this book is split the same way, narratively speaking. You get that council, and then a huge chunk of this book, the rest of the chunk of this book, the rest of the story, shifts to Sam and Frodo as they make their way into Mordor. And I have often complained when I have talked about this book. I've taught this book. We've done read-alongs on it on this channel. I've referenced it many times. I've often complained that sometimes those Hobbit chapters really work my one last good nerve. They tend to be extremely small focus and tedium. Maybe it's just the kind of fantasy reader that I am. I would much rather read about Aragorn and his mighty sword. I would much rather read about Gandalf and the last battle for the West than I would read about what provisions Sam lays out for supper during day 100 of his trek into Mordor with Master Frodo. that sort of stuff just doesn't get to me at all. And yet, when I was rereading this for Chunkster-rama, I was noticing that Tolkien's level of diction, his rhetoric, starts out at the very beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring. It starts out very, very similar to the children's diction that he uses in The Hobbit. And gradually it gets more and more elevated, more and more biblical and awe-inspiring. And I was noticing in this read-along that even the Frodo and Sam sections of The Return of the King have that diction. The whole story is being elevated towards its incredible ending. And I wanted to read you just a couple of paragraphs that show that. And this is mainly an admonishment to myself, because I didn't notice, really, I've never noticed how beautiful this is, because it's a Sam and Frodo chapter. That's wrong. That's the wrong way to do this. They have entered Mordor. But the thing that this segment is alluding to is that Aragorn and Gandalf and the powers of the West have done everything they can to distract Sauron on his throne in Mordor from anything else but them. They've tried to draw his attention to them. That's what this is referring to. Still far away, 40 miles at least, they saw Mount Doom, its feet founded in ashen ruin, its huge cone rising to a great height, where its reeking head was swathed in a cloud. Its fires were now dimmed, and it stood in a smoldering slumber, as threatening and dangerous as a sleeping beast. Behind it there hung a vast shadow, ominous as a thundercloud, the veils of Barad-dûr, that it was reared far away upon a long spur of the ashen mountains thrust down from the north. The dark power was deep in thought, and the eye turned inward, pondering tidings of doubt and danger, a bright sword, and a stern and kingly face it saw, and for a while it gave little thought to other things, and all its great stronghold, gate upon gate and tower on tower, was wrapped in a brooding gloom. Frodo and Sam gazed out in mingled loathing and wonder on the hateful land. Between them and the smoking mountain, and about it north and south, all seemed ruinous and dead, a desert burned and choked. They wondered how the lord of this realm maintained and fed his slaves and his armies. Yet armies he had. As far as their eye could reach, along the skirts of the Morgai, away southward, there were camps, some of tents, some ordered like small towns. One of the largest of these was right below them. Barely a mile out into the plain, it clustered like some huge nest of insects, with straight, dreary streets of huts and long, low, drab buildings. About it, the ground was busy with folk going to and fro. A wide road ran from its southeast to join the Morgul Way, and along its many lines of many lines of small black shapes were hurrying. They're perched on the edge of walking straight into the stronghold of their enemy. And it's typical of Tolkien. He does this quite a bit throughout this book. I'm not going to harp on him because it's a great book. But where it's typical of Tolkien that he raises a question that is legitimate, but that he has no intention of answering. When Sam and Frodo at this point have been roughing it in the wilds of eastern Middle-earth for a long time on the contents of their knapsack. So it's natural that they would look at these huge encampments and say, how on earth can you feed all these people? This is all a wasteland. There are no fields and fields of crops. There are no fields and fields of cattle. How are these monsters, these orcs and Easterlings, being fed day by day in these towns? And Tolkien raises the question, but he doesn't answer it. It is actually a very good question. How is that true? Are they all living on cannibalism? Are they all eating themselves? There seems to be no other possibility. I don't know one way or another. But that's still really good. That is ringing prose. And as any of you have seen, I feel a little bit weird being wary of spoilers when it comes to Lord of the Rings. But when the story is all over, The Lord of the Rings ends exactly as it begins. when I was talking about Fellowship of the Ring, I mentioned that Tolkien makes a disastrous decision at the very beginning of Fellowship of the Ring to begin it with a lot of expositional pussyfooting and farting around about agriculture and pipeweed and various family lineages that no one can be expected to care about. Nobody. And Lord of the Rings ends the same way. When the story is over, when the long cadences of the story's multiple endings are over, you then get a huge appendix that goes on forever and ever. And a first-time reader of this book, coming to that with no guidance, might say, what on earth is this? The story's over. Do I really need to read all this? Do I really need to know what's going on here? And to that first-time reader, I would say the same thing as I would say about the very beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, which is that the answer is no. Skip the appendix. Don't finish where the story ends. You will know exactly where the story ends. You will know exactly, and it is a beautiful ending. It is Sam closing the door to his warm, loving, ordinary house and saying, well, I'm back. That is it. That is the end of the story, and it is a great ending. All the rest of it, the appendices are if you fell in love with this book and you don't want to let go. You want to know everything that happens to everybody, even if it isn't germane to any kind of dramatic plot. If you are one of those people, and there have been many, many thousands of those people, I am one of those people, the appendices are a gift to you. They're meant so that you don't have to go elsewhere. You don't have to find them elsewhere. You can read them right here in the book. But if you're a first-time reader of this book and you think, okay, that was a perfect place to end, is all the rest of this important? No, you don't have to read the rest of it. You can just stop right where the story stops. And that is it. That is the Lord of the Rings. I'm going to put this back in my special Chunkster-rama box. Oh, goodness gracious. Do I dare to leave them out of numerical order, even though Sue Morrow might be watching? They are. Look at that. Oh, my God. I'm just going to want to reach through the screen and change it. That is The Lord of the Rings. That was the first in our Chunksterama. And David Murphy's video will be up soon, or if it isn't up already, and you will get to see his thoughts. That's going to leave a weekend open. And in the meantime, he and I are going to put our heads together and consult on what the next Chunkster should be. I've had many suggestions from some of you. There are a couple that seem more obvious than others. We will consult, and we will let you know. So that is Chunksterama. We're done with that, with the Lord of the Rings. So much fun to talk about this. I could talk about Lord of the Rings every month from now until the end of time and never exhaust it. I feel certain I would never exhaust it. But that is your Chunksterama for today, and we will be back. I think we'll probably give it a rest for next weekend, but we'll make an announcement. At least I will make an announcement on what our next Chunkster is going to be for June. So we will reconvene then, and we'll see what it's going to be. What will it be? Will it be Moby Dick? Will it be War and Peace? Will it be The Wealth of Nations? So many possibilities. Feel free to leave your votes down below and bombard David with your votes as well. We are autocrats, but we are benevolent. We may listen. So in the meantime, I will wrap this up, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.